All right, you're live.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Bye. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. At this time, I'll call the Crow Wing County Board of Commissioners special meeting for November 3rd, 2020 to order. If you will join me in the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, our first order of business today is to approve the for-profit and non-profit award recommendations, Phase 2. I would look for any actions, any questions?
I can present
Administrator
on it,
Houle.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, today we're looking at Phase 2 economic assistance grants for the community in a variety of different ways. I'm going to ask Nick, why don't you come on forward, Nick, to give you a budget update prior to you considering the actions, so you know that if you take these actions, here's where it will leave you with CARES Act dollars. So I'm going to ask him to do that, but first I thought I would start, for the benefit of those who may be watching, what's the history here? Back in July, you authorized the use of CARES Act dollars, which are federal dollars that were sent to Crow Wing County to offset expenses associated with coronavirus, as well as, well, there are a variety of potential uses, reimbursing ourselves as well as doing economic assistance grants. Crow Wing County got $8 million in CARES Act dollars, and initially, back in July, you had allocated up to $4 million of that $8 million for economic assistance grants. In addition to that, we also solicited contributions from other cities and townships throughout the county who weren't going to spend all of their CARES Act dollars. What we know is that on November 15th, anything they have drawn down but not spent, they needed to send to us. And so, anticipating that, very early in this process, we've been working with cities and townships very closely to try to pool together money. And as a result of that, Nick will cover that, but we have an additional $750,000, $800,000 that we got from cities and townships towards this grant program. In Phase 1, on October 30th, you granted preliminary approval to the organizations for nonprofit grants. We had specified two different categories, up to $3 million for economic assistance grants of up to $10,000 each to businesses within Crow Wing County that had been closed by executive order of the governor. And there were other criteria that they had to meet, fewer than 50 employees. We also specified, pardon? We also specified up to $1 million for tax-exempt nonprofits within Crow Wing County, same kinds of criteria. So you did the Phase 1 grants back in October, and what we knew back in October was that there were still sufficient funds left for us to entertain a Phase 2. And so on October 13th, you also authorized Phase 2 of the allocation. We reopened the for-profit and the nonprofit application process. It was for a shortened time window, but that closed on October 23rd, and also expanded the eligibility criteria for both the nonprofit and the for-profit to remove the employee count limits. We would entertain a grant from any organization that had been closed by executive order of the governor. We were interested in receiving applications from any organization throughout the county that provided free daycare with the critical sector workers early in the pandemic. So you may recall when we were in a shutdown, a lockdown, there were essential workers that we expected to continue to show up and go to work. Most county employees were essential workers. Well, oftentimes their daycares were closed. And so there were a couple of organizations in our community, most notably schools and the Brainerd YMCA that I'm aware of, that provided free daycare for those essential workers so that they could continue to show up for work. We also talked about opening an application process to accept grants or applications from any public and private schools with a physical location within Crow Wing County for any unreimbursed COVID-related expenses. Public school systems did get CARES Act dollars, but it was not sufficient to cover all of their costs. So we also opened that up. The latter two categories, for the free daycare and for the schools, we did not put a limit on the application, on the grant amounts for those, so they could apply for what they thought they needed. And then, of course, you authorized today's meeting after a review of the Phase 2 nonprofit and for-profit grants. Nick can give you an idea of, if you do everything that's in your board packet today, where will that leave us on budget? And anything that you do different than what's in your board packet today, then you can kind of gauge, will it throw us over or under? So Nick, I'm
So,
sorry.
point of order before we go any further. I think one piece that was missing here is, and I didn't ask for that, was approval of today's agenda. So before we move forward, I would entertain or wonder if there's any additions to the agenda as printed.
We have
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Brecken.
I would like to include a request from the County Fair Board for discussion.
Okay, so that'll be number 3 then, and the adjournment will move to number 4. Is that okay with you, Commissioner Brecken?
Yes.
Okay, so then I would look for a motion to approve the amended agenda.
So moved.
Commissioner Hoag moves the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Coring seconds the motion. Therese, if you'll call the roll call, please.
Commissioner Hoag?
Aye.
Commissioner Franzine? Aye. Commissioner Coring?
Aye.
Commissioner Brecken?
Aye.
Commissioner Barrows?
Chair votes aye, motion passes. All right, Nick, if you will continue. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. As Tim went through, we allocated all $8 million with $4 million to the grant program, $1.5 for internal expenses, another $1.5 for broadband, and $1 million to unallocated. That was our original allotment that we established. Of that, with the current requests that are on the board for the for-profit grant, we set aside $3 million. We, for preliminary approval, have $2.96 million of that preliminary approved based on what happens today. We also are getting $670,000 from local townships and cities to contribute to the for-profit grant program. So that leaves us with $709,000 available to spend beyond anything that's in your packet today. For the nonprofit side, we set aside $1 million. Cities and townships provided an additional $150,000 towards that grant program. With what's on your packet today and what has been approved in the past, there's $849,829 for preliminary approval, which leaves us with $300,171 available. With the school districts and the child care provider program, there is a request for $728,022. That would go against the two grant programs, leaving us with about $300,000 in the grant programs that would be unspent at this point that we reallocate towards the county's costs. For Crow Wing County's portion, between what has been counted so far for expenses that have been incurred, plus what has been approved over the last few board meetings, we have spent all the way down to just the remaining $69,000 of our $1.5 million. Part of this is staff time accounted for against that. We do have the ability to, with current guidance, take public safety and public health as a presumptive cost against anything else, so we can shore up the rest of that 1.5 with our own internal costs for public safety and public health. We also allocated $1.5 million for broadband. Cities and townships contributed additional $53,475. At this point, we are under the impression that CTC will spend that entire amount, so that entire amount is out. On the unallocated, we left $1 million unallocated. That $1 million is still open for our use or for any use that you as a board dictate. Currently, we have $1.351 million available to spend above and beyond what is in your packet today and what has been approved in the past. Any questions?
That includes the unallocated 1 million?
Yes.
It does, okay.
Yep.
And Mr. Chair, members of the board, what we're proposing is that you would authorize the grants that are in our packet today and for discussion around the for-profit, the nonprofit, the schools, and the free daycare. And then after that, because where we are in our time frame, the rest of the, we'll just reconcile up to the rest of the CARES Act dollars. We have a presumptive eligibility of Crow Wing County staff of, that exceeds 8 million. We could have taken the whole thing just for ourselves. We didn't do that, and I'm pretty proud of the fact that what we have recommended for you sends about 6.5 of the 8 million out the door, nonprofit grants, for-profit grants, helping the YMCA with free daycare, the public school systems, and broadband. And so most of the, far and away, most of the allocation that we got for federal CARES Act dollars went out into the community. And I think you should be proud of that. Mr. Chair, I'm going to move on, if you are okay with that, to
Yes.
talking about the specifics. You have in your packet applications for Phase 2 for both the for-profit and the nonprofit organizations. You may recall that those applications were due on October 23rd, on October 26th. Subcommittees appointed by the board chair reviewed each of those applications, so it comes to you as a recommendation from those two groups. The recommended board action is to grant preliminary approval to the organizations that are on file in the list for the grant amounts not to exceed the amounts listed. That's important because we haven't issued checks on any of the grants yet, and we will not issue a check in an amount greater than what we have for documentation in hand on the day we write the checks. And so between now and December 1st, we have to focus on getting the documentation in from these folks so that they could actually receive everything that you have preliminarily recommended they receive. Further, staff is directed to issue payments to these grant amounts once the documentation process is complete, and it is authorized by the county administrator. And further, the board approves the grant agreements for each of the grantees as on file. This would cover both the for-profit and the nonprofit grants that you guys reviewed.
So with that, I would look for a motion to make that approval. Unless there's some questions. Commissioner Brecken, Commissioner Coring, any questions?
No.
None from me, Mr. Chairman. Motion to approve.
Commissioner Coring makes the motion to approve.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Franzine. Therese, if you would take the roll call, please.
Commissioner Franzine?
Yes.
Commissioner Coring?
Yes.
Commissioner Brecken?
Yes.
Commissioner Hoag?
Aye.
Commissioner Barrows?
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, the next board action in your packet is to deal with those grantees that had provided free daycare, to reimburse them for the costs associated with that. We thought that that would involve the 3 public school systems and the Brainerd YMCA. Those were the ones that we were aware of. As it turns out, the public school systems, all 3 of them, used their CARES Act dollars to recover that particular COVID cost. And so there was no public school applications for the free daycare. I think they covered their costs in a different way. We did receive an application from the Brainerd YMCA. They were ordered closed by the governor's executive order. They remained open to provide that free child care for essential workers. And in addition to that, the demand for their summer camp program is also substantially higher than normal for pretty obvious reasons. And with the social distancing requirements and the corresponding costs necessary to do to change that staff to student ratio was also a significant cost for them. They did have some income during that time from parents paying child care, but it did not cover the cost per unit. And so I got together a group, Nick, Debbie, Kara, and I, and looked over those applications. We're content that you could fund the entire $171,388 if that is your wishes. I put that forward for your consideration. The request for board action would be to grant preliminary approval to the Y for grant amounts not to exceed the $171,388, contingent on the submission of receipts, and we will issue payments as authorized by the county administrator and use the grant agreements that we have on file.
Commissioners, any questions, concerns? Seeing none, I would look for a motion to support this recommended action.
I'll make the motion.
Commissioner Hoag makes a motion,
Second.
second by Commissioner Franzine. Therese, if you would make the roll call, please.
Commissioner Coring,
Aye.
Commissioner Brecken,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoag,
Aye.
Commissioner Franzine. Aye. Commissioner Barrows.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, also enclosed in your packet is a request to consider and approve applications from area schools for unreimbursed expenses. We did get applications from all three of the public school systems, as well as private schools throughout the county. So I'll walk through those as quickly as I can. St. Francis was requesting reimbursement for additional cleaning and sanitation, some Zoom licenses for distance learning. Now we know what Zoom is. Sanitizer stations, some laptops and other technology for distance learning. They had some marginal staff costs due to teacher absences. And the group of Kara, Debbie, I, and Nick are recommending that you could fund the entire $31,428.81 that they requested. The Brainerd Public Schools is requesting reimbursement for the purchase and distribution costs for some Chromebooks for distance learning. That would provide a minimum of one device per family per 2 children. Recommending that funding, the entire amount, $282,202.97. The Pequot Lakes Public Schools is requesting reimbursement for the costs associated with sanitation supplies, masks, PPE for the band, some striping of their parking lot. That was to accommodate higher numbers of parents dropping off their children. And so for some curriculum resources for distance learning and a few Chromebooks, recommending funding the entire $85,182.94. Discovery Woods Montessori is requesting reimbursement for the purchase of 26 Chromebooks to support distance learning. Recommend funding the entire $11,765. Lake Region Christian Schools is a little bit interesting. We did tell them, ask for whatever you can think to ask, and they put together a very robust application. And so it would be for a disproportionately higher level of funding per student than we're seeing with the other schools, and so we did recommend that this one get scaled back a little bit. And so they're requesting $7,400 for safety and sanitizing supplies, requesting $126,000 to supply 170 laptops. Laptops are different than Chromebooks too, so that's a distinction that was not lost on us, that a laptop is a higher functioning device than a Chromebook. Case protectors, UV cleaning, charging station, power adapters, all the accoutrements that you need. They're also requesting $60,000 to transition existing teacher desktop computers to laptop to facilitate distance learning. That was 15 laptops, docking stations, document cameras. They also requested $2,000 to upgrade their wide area network to support higher volumes of wireless devices in operation at the same time. And they're finally also requested reimbursement for a temperature screening equipment totaling $12,998. What the group is recommending that you fund is the entire request for safety and sanitizing supplies. That would be $74,5350. Recommending funding of no more than $50,000 for student laptops. This would not fund them all, but would fund approximately 40% of them. This would also be more on par with the price per unit for Chromebooks, which is what we funded for the Brainerd School District. Recommend funding no more than $25,000 for teaching stations for the same reasons as the funding for the student laptops. Recommend funding the entire $2,137.50 for the WLAN upgrade. Recommending that we do not fund the temperature screening station. It was a pretty involved temperature screening station, and many employers are using simple handheld thermometers, so it was a little bit more involved, and we just thought it was more involved than what we have funded elsewhere. This would put their total recommended funding at $84,591, which still funds them at probably the highest rate per student, but it is much more in line proportionally with what the others were. Crosby-Ironton Public Schools is asking for $61,463 for sanitation supplies, Chromebooks for K through 2 for distance learning, Chromebook parts, power adapters, laptop docking stations, and some mouse accessories to support distance learning. And they also need some software support for distance learning. And we're recommending the entire funding of that amount, $61,463. The total recommendations for all of these public and private schools is $728,021.72, put it forward for your consideration. The recommended board action is to grant preliminary approval to these area schools for the grant amounts listed, not to exceed the amounts listed. They also have to submit receipts and documentation to justify the expenses, and we will issue grant amounts once that documentation is complete, as authorized by the county administrator, and enter into nonprofit grant agreements with each of them.
So unless there's questions or concerns, I would look for a motion to grant the preliminary approval to the area schools.
So moved.
Commissioner Franzine makes the motion to move it.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Hoag. Therese, if you would call the roll call, please.
Commissioner Brecken,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoag,
Aye.
Commissioner Franzine,
Aye.
Commissioner Coring,
Aye.
Commissioner Barrows.
Chair votes aye, motion passes.
So, Mr. Chair and members, this will conclude our allocation of the CARES Act dollars. We're going to finish what we started, getting documentation on Phase 1 and Phase 2 applications, getting documentation from the schools, from the Brainerd YMCA. We have to finish that all up, and any money that we haven't spent has to be returned by December 1st. You can see from our presumptive eligibility of staff costs, we will not need to return any dollars. The only question is, how much is sent out the door versus how much is kept in the door? That will be a function of how good the documentation is that folks can produce.
So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Tyler Glenn at Bladek and your staff, and Kim Rollins at United Way and her staff, and our staff, Debbie and the group here that's worked on this project. I also want to thank the commissioners that worked on each of the committees for their input on looking at these various opportunities for our local communities. And just thank you for everything that you've done. I know it's been a lot of work in a short period of time. I know for our staff, we threw the election on top of all of that, so it's just been an outstanding effort by everyone to get this money into the community where it will be utilized and hopefully help a lot of these businesses get through some of these winter months. So thank you very much for everything that you've done. Appreciate it. With that, we'll move on to number 4, Commissioner Brecken.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Chair, I've received a request from Gary Doucette on behalf of the Fair Board. And the Fair Board is requesting the opportunity to drill a 6-inch well at the county fairgrounds. They need approval from the county board because this is a leasehold improvement on that property. The reason for the well is that the Fair Board pays double the price for water from the city and sewer from the city of Brainerd for the fairgrounds because they're not in the city limits. All existing buildings that are there will continue to stay on city sewer and water. The well will be used for the animals, fire truck, and other water needs on the grounds. The well will cost approximately $13,265 with Northland Well Company purchasing, and Northland Well is also purchasing some signing there that will be reimbursing the county fair board $500 a year for 5 years, or a total of $2,500. This brings the net cost of the well down to $10,765. The fair board has the monies available to do this, and they would estimate that there would be a 4-year payback on that investment at the
Questions? Do we understand what they're doing?
Is this out of the CARES Act dollars?
No,
This is, okay.
this is out of their own dollars that they have
Okay,
in the bank.
so separate.
And I know they have a fund balance around $200 and some thousand, so they are capable of funding this. And what they're trying to do is reduce their cost of the city water bill because they're watering animals, and it doesn't require the same water that we would as users of that system. So
Are there any health department issues with a private well for this use, or?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hoag, they are outside the city limits, and so I don't believe so. They will need a permit from the Minnesota Department of Health, as does anybody who's drilling a private well. I think they will have to go through that process. The only reason we're taking this issue up is because we have a lease agreement with the Fair Board, and they can't make leasehold improvements to the property without our permission. So, for instance, when the curling club was built, they had to get our permission to build the curling club building on their property. It's not entirely clear, is a well a leasehold improvement that would require our approval or not? It's not entirely clear, and so erring on the side of transparency, Bill's bringing their request forward today. What, if you're okay with it, it's just a simple motion to allow them to drill the well.
Yes.
I have
Mr.
a-
Chair?
Commissioner Franzine?
I
what-
have a question. Bill, you said something about a 4-year payback. Can you explain that more?
Well, right now, the city is charging the fair approximately $10,000 a year for water and sewer. And so by being able to have and they're using it for everything, the animals, the fire truck, and for filling that up, so that the amount of water that they're using from the city, by using the well over a period of time, will be less than and offset that $10,000 bill that they're paying annually to the city. So it's really getting some of that money back. What the estimate cost will be coming down, I'm not sure of that, but I know that they'll be using less city water that, like I say, on the animals and other watering needs on the property.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Coring, anything, any questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Then I would look for a motion to approve.
I'll make the motion.
I would so move.
Commissioner Hoag made the motion to approve.
I'll second.
Commissioner Brecken seconds the motion. Therese, if you would call the roll call, please.
Commissioner Hoag,
Aye.
Commissioner Franzine,
Aye.
Commissioner Coring,
Aye.
Commissioner Brecken,
Aye.
Commissioner Barrows.
Chair votes aye, motion passes. Any other business? With that, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner Franzine makes the motion to adjourn,
Second.
second by Commissioner Hoag. Therese, one more time.
Commissioner Franzine,
Aye.
Commissioner Coring,
Aye.
Commissioner Brecken,
Aye.
Commissioner Hoag,
Aye.
Commissioner Barrows.
Chair votes aye. Motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Tyler, thank you very much. Kim, thank you, if she's still on the line.
Yeah, they're not done yet.
No.
Documentation.